all the element called format ID.
We all operate with certain rules. And many, by and large, many of those rules some may be explicit, but many of them are implicit. They're subconscious, they're internalized, and we don't even think about them as being rules. We don't even think about them, period. We just use them without thinking. And, they're based on, what we've heard probably since before we were born, whatever music we were hearing as we're growing up, whatever music is around us, that gets internalized, and it forms a certain framework that we use without really thinking about it. And it determines it helps us determine, or it plays a role in determining what we think sounds right and what we think sounds wrong, what we think sounds good, what we think sounds bad. When I first started studying Indian classical music, there's many rules. When you learn a particular rag, and you have to follow the rules of the rag, there's a certain sort of so-called grammar, or whatever you want to call it. You have to play the upward, when you're ascending, you play a certain sequence, and you may have to skip certain notes in the ascending sequence. You may include them in the descending sequence. You may have to, once you play a particular note, you may have to follow it with another note. So that was what I was grappling with in the beginning, is, it seems like when I listen to, Indian classical artists, well, you hear this amazing creativity and ability to improvise. But then as I'm learning this, I'm feeling so boxed in and overwhelmed by all the rules. So, what's up with that? Well, as I was mentioning, we all have these sort of subconscious rules that we've internalized from listening to music since we were very young. And so we have this as our reference point. We're used to that. That's what we think music should sound like. So intuitively, when we play or sing, we tend to follow those rules, whatever they may be, and we don't even think about it. And so that helps us to create a jazz feel, or it helps us to create the feel of a certain tal and a certain rag, or a certain tempo, or whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. And so for somebody like me who grew up in America, and I'm trying to learn a music that comes from a completely different part of the world that I have really had no association with at all, and it's a challenge for me, it's also a challenge for my teachers. And so I recall having a conversation with Devastali, one time, and he had a saying, or he had something that he would like to say, like he would tend to say. He would teach me, the grammar of a particular rag, and he'd say, okay, now you've got the basic rules, you have all these examples, I've given you examples of fast lines, of slow lines, and all these things, and so now you can go on improvising, and you'll know if it's right, if it sounds right. So I was struggling with this. This was while I was trying to understand all these things and put this puzzle together in my mind, right? I was struggling with this, and I'm thinking, somehow that doesn't work for me. I'll know if it's right. I'll know if it's right, if it sounds right. It just didn't ring true. And I realized after thinking about it and processing all this that the reason why he said it is because he's used to teaching, students from India. And yeah, for them, they would know if it's right, if it sounds right, because they grew up there hearing this music for years. And they know intuitively what it's supposed to sound like. Whereas I'm coming from a completely different set of traditions. I have no idea, really. On a certain level, I really don't have that great an idea of what the music is supposed to sound like. Yes, I'm learning the grammar and the rules, but I don't have all this intuition that's developed over years and decades of listening. So then I realized what it is, I have this deficiency, that I don't have this intuition. I need to develop it. So I went back to Devastali the next day, and I told him, look, I said, this idea works for somebody who grew up in India, who's got this internalized system, or framework that they're working with. But for somebody like me, it doesn't really work. And so the challenge that we have is that I need to get from you that intuition. I need to understand it in much more depth so that I can develop that intuition, so that when I do improvise, I'll know if it's right, if it sounds right.